Hey, what's going on? This is the OG Kickoff. Subscribe to the OG Kickoff on YouTube. I am Connor O'Gara. Will spring football happening, underway? We've got pads popping. We've got teams that are actually willing to talk about spring football. Apparently, we are going to have spring games. We're going to have full coverage of that. But it's just good to see it on the feed. And I don't mean to be that guy that wishes time away or anything like that, but I'll tell you what, man, like actually seeing coaches speak after a spring practice, it's like, all right, we are back. The offseason's officially over.
Yeah, I mean, there was a period of time where we thought these have gone the way of the dodo bird. We thought that they were going to be CIA level, like clearance to get on the field or to see spring ball. There were some made up weird games going on for spring games, so it's good to see that spring football is back.
And you know what? We need to remember that era in which all of the secrets were going to come out if spring football had actually happened, and tampering would have just run rampant, and it just would have been a total disaster had spring football existed in the portal era, NIL era as well. But yeah, thank goodness we're past that, because we will have actual things to talk about coming up. Well, we do have a great pod coming up. We have Aaron Murray. We have a great discussion on not just Georgia, but some quarterback stuff as well. A little bit of a 180 on Arch Manning from one Aaron Murray, and then we have Lad of the Week. We'll talk a little bit of Lou Holtz. Spoiler alert on that one. But first, well, I gotta say, this has to feel so good for you to see Brian Kelly say something publicly, and you don't have to either squirm or defend it. Just before we get to the actual context of what he said and why it's something we're discussing today, just that premise in general, the second that he was fired from LSU, you had to know this day was going to come, and it was going to be a good day for you.
Connor, I'm so over Brian Kelly that, like, we did the preview earlier. We were talking to Aaron Murray, and you're like, hey, there's Brian Kelly comments. So I was like, brother, I didn't listen to a word he said. And so this is how much love I have in my heart for you. I found myself Googling in the between times, Brian Kelly, Danny Cannell, LSU. And so I was having to go through and listen to what was apparently an hour-long segment. Couldn't find I was prepared to listen to the whole thing just for you. But what I did find was a transcript that a couple of aggregators did. So I, of course, did like the little summary where it speaks to you, like while I was like doing some stuff. And I actually found that to be better than listening to Brian Kelly talk. Like I thought, oh, this annoying AI voice, it can't get worse. Then I clicked on the clips of Brian Kelly talking, and I went, oh my God, I really defended this guy. So it's been a full, I just pretend he doesn't exist. But it was a nice reminder that I don't have to deal with him anymore.
Brian Kelly went on Sirius and told Danny Cannell, Dusty Dvorak, that the former team that he coached, one LSU Tigers, that they will have a roster well north of $40 million next year. Now, there, like you said, there is context to it. They were kind of discussing like just basically what's going on in this day and age in college football. Do we need to have change? Yeah, duh. Okay, everybody knows that. And they get to talk, and it's kind of an offhanded comment, as they usually are with Brian Kelly when he's like, "Oh, it's going to be well north of $40 million." And there are a million takeaways from Brian Kelly being the main source of that information, because I'm not sure if you heard, things didn't end well for Brian Kelly at LSU, and there was a bit of money involved. You knew this piece of information. I'm not breaking news by saying that, right?
I mean, I knew this information, but I will say, I think Brian Kelly kind of got set up by this quote because he didn't say, they didn't say, hey, Brian, how much do you think that roster costs? And he was like,
True.
$40 million. Like you said, like Dusty puts it out there and he's like, yeah, it should be around 40. And then kind of like playing with him, Brian Kelly's like, could be, it seems like it's north of that. So he was kind of playing off of what was said, and they got him. They once again, Brian Kelly has walked into the bear trap by the media.
Let's remember that last August, Brian Kelly talked very what's the right word to say here? Borderline braggish about the fact that his team had an $18 million roster. $1 million of which came from his own pocket. Let's remember that part, because that is the type of thing that a head coach facing a pivotal season can do if he knows that he is indeed facing a pivotal season. And Brian Kelly very much knew that. And you can tell me that he didn't know that. And then I would tell you, then why did Garrett Nussmeier play football in the year 2025? So we know that Brian Kelly did that because, well, this is braggish. And Brian Kelly revealed that at SEC Media Days last year that he and his wife donated $1 million to LSU's NIL fund, almost as if it were this flex. And your boy bought in, and many others did. Let's also remember Brian Kelly might not have survived this past season, this disastrous 2025 season that prompted one Lane Kiffin, but he did in fact recoup that $1 million in the form of a fully promised, with some offset language, $54 million buyout that was not necessarily a settled upon agreement. It was paid in full per the terms of his contract and not renegotiated at some $30 million lump sum payment. Again, it can be reduced in future dates if Brian Kelly gets one of these coaching jobs. I do think he will end up getting a coaching job eventually, but that's what we know right now based on these dollars and cents and the fact that Brian Kelly, in his first real notable comment post LSU, is very fittingly talking about LSU's roster and how expensive it is. That just kind of seems right.
And it's funny too, because you could argue that the 2025 roster was more expensive. Because if you throw in the $18 million, maybe subtract one for Brian Kelly, you add in Brian Kelly's buyout and potentially Lane Kiffin's salary, he was probably playing with 3 or 4 times as much money. And the thing that's so funny on that interview, he goes, I'm not sure where LSU got that money. And I agree with that. Brian Kelly, he was like, when he was kind of everyone's favorite topic, including, some of the leadership in place in our country right now, wants to talk about the sport of college football and how everything is broken. And I'm sure we'll get to that in a second. He was just sitting there like, it probably shouldn't be this way, guys. Like, it shouldn't be an $18 million roster, and y'all shouldn't have paid me all this money to go away. But here I am.
Brian Kelly's doing something extremely relatable here, Will. It's extremely relatable. He is setting the stage for Lane Kiffin and doing so in a way that makes it seem like he's kind of poking holes in the current structure of college football, which maybe he thinks that in his heart of hearts. We know that he, as recently as 2 years ago, was talking about how crazy the spring portal was and, it just goes to the highest bidders. We know that Brian Kelly is not a full-on adapt or die guy, even if he did some things this past year that made you think that he was of that mindset. But what he is really ultimately trying to do with this is he is trying to set the stage to get everyone to understand the context of either of these two paths. Either this north of $40 million roster is giving Lane Kiffin an unprecedented advantage that, if he succeeds with, instantly makes him an outlier compared to Brian Kelly in his 3.5-ish seasons at LSU, or this $40 million roster, north of $40 million roster, is if it were to produce the same results as Brian Kelly, that should be deemed a major knock against Lane Kiffin. Either way, what Brian Kelly is trying to do is make himself look better by revealing that information to the world and doing so in kind of an offhanded remark. And if we're being honest, I would not expect anything other than that of Brian Kelly at this point. Okay. It makes sense. We know that if Brian Kelly lowballed the actual number on last year's roster at LSU, if he said that $18 million and he was really more like 27 or 28 or something like that, that we probably weren't going to find out that information. All right. Even the College Sports Commission, with their due diligence and all this looking into these contracts and blah, 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 we weren't actually going to find out that information. So Brian Kelly can kind of spin this however he wants. By Brian Kelly's own admission, Lane Kiffin stepped in and instantly got more support than he ever did. Okay. And that's probably the type of thing that Kelly could have never imagined when he made the decision to leave financially limited Notre Dame for the less financially limited and borderline fantasy factory known as Louisiana State University. Irony is just dripping all over the place here. Okay. And that's what's so funny.
Jeff Landry's fantasy factory is just such a great explanation of what's going on at LSU. Again, I felt, Brian, you could talk about Brian Kelly's honesty and his morality and all that, but I felt the exact same shock in his voice of like, where did this money come from? Because to your point, he was giving some of his own money. And I think really the story here is the price of a brick went up. I think that what used to be an expensive roster during the long gone days of Brian Kelly this season, and what we're projected to be spending going forward for the best portal class in college football, because Brian Kelly did sign, depending on the site, a top 1 or 2 or 3 portal class in there, brought in Jaden Daniels, and it didn't cost him nearly what it's costing Lane Kiffin. So I think that's more of his take, is like, this sport has just gone completely off the deep end, where I used to be able to go bargain bin shopping and get a Jaden Daniels.
Brian Kelly thought that he was moving into the neighborhood and he was going to have the nicest house, nicest piece of land. Everything was going to be great. And then his brother moved in down the street and then bought an entirely vacant plot of land and built by far the nicest house that's twice the size of his. And it probably didn't sit well. Okay. Like there is something to be said for that. And I'm not saying that Lane Kiffin's resources are twice as good as Brian Kelly's, but there is clearly an element of jealousy that is seeping in here for a guy that had one season of NIL at Notre Dame and then went to LSU and then thought, okay, this is how you're able to win a championship. And look, if Kiffin never beats Saban like he did, then okay, like that's part of Kiffin's resume. We acknowledge that. That will forever be considered a knock against him, right? Like he didn't get to do that. Brian Kelly did. Brian Kelly can always get to have that over Lane in this hypothetical argument in which he is comparing himself to the stepdad, whatever you want to call it. Okay. Kiffin never got to Atlanta like Brian Kelly did year one. And Kiffin has never led his team in the playoff like Kelly did at Notre Dame. And Kelly did all these things, and he's looking around at these dollars and cents and going, where is this money coming from? How in the world did it get to this place of desperation? And Brian Kelly is so responsible for it in so many ways. And if he doesn't see that, I hope that the reaction to those comments have made him see that, because he's just trying to remind the rest of us that Kiffin deserves to be graded with a different context, because Brian Kelly, not sure if you ever heard this, if we've ever mentioned this on this show at all, but Brian Kelly inherited a situation that had 39 scholarship players, and Lane Kiffin's got the one with $40 million worth of talent on that roster. Well, north of $40 million. And that dynamic in itself is feeding into this. So whatever you think Brian Kelly's trying to do by talking about the bigger picture issues in college football, remember that context, okay? Before you get to any other thought that Brian Kelly might have had in his brain.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, it just goes to show a sad fact of life that I think all of us at times have had to grapple with, which is, hey, okay, nobody liked Brian Kelly when he came to LSU. Nobody likes Lane Kiffin right now, and he prefers it that way. But the difference is, from day one, the people of Louisiana were on board for Lane Kiffin. And when you list their accomplishments back to back, the way you just did, it's pretty funny for one of them, isn't it? And it's for Brian Kelly, because to your point, multiple playoff teams, obviously he leaves, his team, doesn't exactly make it, whatever. So does he get credit for that kind of same situation? But that being said, like his resume, again, he beat Nick Saban, which is a really funny one, and fewer attempts. And Brian Kelly's sitting here going, I did all this for y'all. I brought this team back, and y'all didn't give me these resources you gave Lane Kiffin. And the harsh reality of that is we can be real. This is a safe space. We like Lane Kiffin. That's the difference. Being likable will get you but so much in this world, and it truly will. There are athletes who have never won. Charles Barkley never won a ring. We're going to love him the same we're going to love Shaq, because we just love Charles Barkley, and that's just what it is.
When Will says we, he's saying that as an LSU fan, and I don't blame you. I really don't. Maybe I should just be the biggest Brian Kelly fan post LSU possible. Just hype him up. Just every time I list the top candidates for a job, it's always Brian Kelly one. Just South Carolina comes open or something like that. Oh no, we're not gonna Shane Beamer's coming on very soon. South Carolina not open. Bad example.
I had a thought you might enjoy listening to this too, because they asked him, what would you do if you were the commissioner of college football? And I thought about something. Okay, so think about this comp, right? So like LeBron James and Nick Saban are whiners with an end in mind. Okay, they whine strategically to get what they want. Okay,
are you saying that because LeBron likes wine and he considers himself a sommelier?
A little bit of vino going. Yeah, you see it. And so those guys who are competitive whiners are not good commissioners. Now, Brian Kelly, he's a little bit more of a Chris Paul. He's a guy who just whines for the sake of whining, sometimes to his own detriment. And you know who you want as a commissioner or the head of the NBAPA? A guy who just whines, a guy who doesn't actually whine to make his situation better, might whine to make his situation worse. He's a student of the game of whining. And I think that's the type of guy you really need in your back pocket to be like a Roger Goodell, who it's like, what are we doing here? I don't even know. How could you be mad at me? I don't have an agenda.
So Brian Kelly, to be clear, we should not recommend that he take over at Wisconsin. We should say commissioner of college football. Let Brian Kelly run the show.
I don't think he needs to run the show, but I think he needs to be in the room. Again, there was not a politics podcast, guys, but there was a big commission the other day.
Heard about it.
Brian Kelly. Well, I'll tell you why he wasn't there, because two Notre Dame administrators were there, and they were like, "Don't get Brian Kelly in here. We're gonna walk out. We're gonna do a protest." But yeah, I mean, he's a guy who's been around and seen the sport change, and he hasn't been able to bend the rules almost whatsoever. In fact, as soon as he misread the Notre Dame NIL thing, because they have actually done pretty well with NIL. So I don't think he's a guy who practices gamesmanship. I think he's a guy who just whines.
Here's the thing that I think is worth remembering with all this. Brian Kelly left Notre Dame and Lane Kiffin left Ole Miss for the same place, but in very different eras of the sport, even though they are in back-to-back eras. And it's very difficult to see that they are different eras, but they actually are. Okay. And it comes down to whether or not Lane Kiffin is going to win a national championship, just like it did with Brian Kelly. It's just different context and a different path to be able to get there. If I look back on the coaches who were hired in the last 20 years, there are only a handful of them that I think were given the full pass fail association of title or bust. We throw that term around too much. We just do. It doesn't get thrown around as much with the beginning of the tenure, but I think it really needs to be kept in mind because it follows a coach. Very rarely do we get to a place where we totally take that off the table. And if we totally take that off the table, you're very likely on the hot seat. Okay. And so what I went back and did in light of these comments, in light of Brian Kelly trying to set the bar even higher for Lane Kiffin by talking about this $40 million roster, even though it lacks some context that we'll get to in a little bit here. I went back and I tried to find these situations where I would have said, yep, that's title or bust. If they finish at that job without a national championship, we will look back and say they failed. They came up short. So here are those guys, and feel free to add any of these at the end if you feel like I missed one. Lane Kiffin at LSU, TBD, that we know. Lane Kiffin at USC, fail. Albeit with some restrictions, NCAA sanctions. You get it. Kalen DeBoer, Alabama, TBD, but consensus would say it is a fail until that happens. Brian Kelly, LSU, fail. Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M, fail. Lincoln Riley, USC, TBD, but consensus would say it's a fail until it happens. Kirby Smart, Georgia, succeed. Jim Harbaugh, Michigan, succeed. Even with all the turmoil that it caused, Michigan fans would still be like, yes, that was a success, the Jim Harbaugh era and the decade of it. Urban Meyer, Florida and Ohio State, succeed. Charlie Strong, Texas, fail. Tom Herman, Texas, fail. Nick Saban, Alabama, succeed. Remember, Nick Saban, different context, he was the $4 million man. He was the $4 million man who already had a national championship to boot. So you can look at all of those. And I would give a slight, and maybe you disagree with this, I would give a slight pass for the internal promotion hires like Ryan Day at Ohio State, Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, Randy Shannon at Miami, Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame, and even Ed Orgeron at LSU. Maybe they got to places where it would have felt like it would have been a disappointment had they not won a national championship, like Ryan Day going into 2024. But I don't think you can start their tenure and say that definitively, that if they don't win a ring, it will be considered a failure. Those are the jobs with those types of expectations, regardless of what the money was and how the money was acquired, whether it was 40 million, whether it was 4 million, I don't know. But those are the jobs in which we have said those exact things and walked away, or maybe we're still in the midst of thinking that this is all about a championship and all the other stuff kind of doesn't matter.
You meant Clay Helton at USC, right?
I didn't put Clay Helton at USC.
You said an internal hire that was moved up, and then you said Lincoln Riley.
Oh, yes. I should be added. Yes, I
just
should
making sure. I was like, because I think you put him in two different places. Clay Helton was not a championship guy. That was just like a program guy. We'll see how it goes. I think that makes sense. I'm gonna. Okay, let me quickly go through this list. I don't disagree with any of these, and yeah, because I think the Texas job historically that makes sense. Do you think Gus Malzahn succeeded?
That's a great question, Will. It's a great question because the context of the previous season and what he inherited, yes, we know Gene Chizik, my guy, did not win an SEC game in 2012. You go to a national championship year one. You bring Auburn fans joy that they will never forget. They will never, ever forget that. I think you could consider Gus a success at Auburn. I think you could definitely say he was a success. Now, was he the quarterback whisperer in the way that they hoped he would be? No. Did he still provide a lot of really good moments? Did he still get to 2 SEC championships, win one of them, get to a national championship? come a drive away from a national championship. I would say that is a success. I do not think that he entered Auburn with that being the thing that would define his legacy. I think it was a different set of circumstances, and I think we all kind of knew that, even if there were plenty of Auburn fans that felt the angst of the Nick Saban era and thought, man, it'd be great to win one, knowing that he was on the sideline for 2010, of course, with Cam, and knowing that he had played a part in it. But I don't think I would have put that expectation on him. Again, this is a bar that is really freaking high, okay? Like really, really high to start off with. And it's a difficult thing to see. And I didn't have like Larry Coker in there because he would have been just before this 20 years, like that cutoff. He would have probably fallen into that, even though he was an internal promotion. Maybe he and Ryan Day are kind of in that similar sort of camp. But like I wouldn't put James Franklin in that camp because of what he inherited at Penn State, even though Bill
That's a really
O'Brien,
good one too. You're so right, because they were worse off than LSU for sure. So there is a builder and then there's a winner. Okay, I
Mario
love that.
Cristobal, not in that camp. Mario Cristobal entering a situation in which
Yeah, you're
they
right.
literally are just figuring out how to spend money and only learned how to spend money because Kirk Herbstreit got on College Game Day and told Miami how to spend money. That is not title or bust, in my opinion. That might be title or bust in the mind of a casual college football fan who, like, is 50 years old and has seen all these great eras of Miami football. I don't think that would have been a fair thing to put on Mario Cristobal when he showed up.
Do you think that every Florida head coach since Urban Meyer has not been? I think Dan Mullen was title or bust.
I don't think Dan Mullen was title or bust. I don't think he was title or bust. I think Dan
He did
Mullen,
almost everything else though, you know?
he didn't win an SEC championship. But again, we're talking about, did they ever get to title or bust? I think that's the question you're asking. I'm just simply
I'm like,
asking.
when Dan Mullen was hired, given that he was poached from Mississippi State, granted, was he an internal guy? That's another like line of scrimmage, like very
No,
close
not an
type
internal
of
guy.
guy.
No,
Okay.
I wouldn't consider that an internal guy. It's a guy that comes back. I'm talking like you're
Yeah.
promoted from OC. Even if you have ties there, even if you coach there, I think that's a different set of circumstances. I would not put him at title or bust just because you understand the context of the credit card 9 scandal, what a disaster 2017 was for Florida, and knowing that Dan Mullen was also not in the position of Lane Kiffin. Dan Mullen was Scott Strickland's fourth choice in that cycle. And so I don't think any coach that's in that spot we're able to put that like title or bust sort of thing. Like if Dan Mullen had won an SEC championship at Florida, I think we would have looked back and said that was a great success. I think that was a fuse that burned a little bit too hot and it burned out a little bit quicker than a lot of us expected. But I don't think that he would have that sort of thing going in.
This is one of my favorite topics. I'm not just blowing smoke here because I think that just goes to show what the true expectations are at these different programs, right? Because how rare has it truly been? Because everybody's, we'd love to win a natty. We'll win a natty. This is our year. Da, da, da. But it's like, how many teams are willing to fire their coach or call their coach a failure specifically
Yes.
for not doing that thing? That's why I make the
Mark
Auburn
Richt.
point. That's why I make the Florida point, because I think those are right there. But I think, and it's where you start, it's where you go, and where you finish. I think that Gus has aged like fine wine, since he left, because everything since there has been worse, right? And I think that we could look at, again, Muschamp wasn't like that Florida. It's so weird to me to look back at all these Florida hires and go, even though Florida was competitive, even though they're in the hunt for the SEC championship, they won the East a couple of times in there. None of those guys are really seen as this big resource resetting thing. Yeah, man. So I think that's so I'm sorry, one more. I don't want to drag this too long, but what makes Urban Meyer coming out of Utah different than like a Billy Napier, or you have Tom Herman on here too.
I would consider Urban in a different spot at Florida. I think Urban had title or bust because of one big reason, and that's the fact that Spurrier was the one who was wanted, and Spurrier was still there. And there was an expectation of, if you are going to be considered as good as this guy was, you had better do what this guy did. And him still being an active part of this conference, I think added to it. And I think there was still a sense of skepticism, knowing that Urban was at the time considered kind of an out of the box hire. Like he wasn't as big and splashy, but it was more so like, if you don't do the thing that Spurrier did and provide us this period of dominance. I'm not saying that 2 and 3 years was considered like the standard, but I do think that Urban went into that Florida job, only 4 years removed from Spurrier, with that sort of expectation.
Yeah, so I think that's why this is so interesting because again, and I've kind of gone back and forth mentally about look, LSU has at times been this 8-9 win team that like couldn't beat Alabama for all those years. Why is LSU seeing as this job? And the answer is after fumbling and ending up with Coach O, after winning the championship, back to back coaches like that, where you bring a guy in, you reset the market, you say, if you don't win a natty, you failed. And it's making me come around to your point about Brian Kelly, because I remember the terrible days under Coach O. Again, the 39 scholarship players, how much fun Jaden Daniels was. And if we had, I believe we disagreed on that, where I said I would, I would hire Brian Kelly again. I think it worked out for LSU, especially now looking at Lane Kiffin. But to your point, he didn't do what he was brought in to do. And from that standpoint, he failed. You could say LSU ended up with Lane Kiffin. Brian Kelly ended up with, $54 million handshake. We both kind of made out like bandits here. But overall, he failed. And I think that that's fair to say.
I have a dozen coaches or so, and in that 20-year stretch that I would say had clear title or bust expectations that were going to define a coach's tenure. Again, we're just talking about when they signed up for the job. And we were trying to look into the crystal ball and say, if you leave this job without having won a championship, it's going to be considered a letdown. Like, I think if you want to extend the timeline a little bit, Les Miles is an interesting one too, to bring it back to LSU. I probably would say no, but we have the context now knowing, all right, well, Saban came back to the SEC. And how did that change that mindset? And there was, I've talked to Hester about this before, of like, Les wanted to show that he was capable of winning with his own players. He wanted to show like that steady improvement. The 2007 season was kind of the culmination of all of that. And I do think, though, at the time that you probably wouldn't have put that on him, knowing that, look, as great as Saban was, LSU was still not built up to the place that they ultimately became, where it was, 20 consecutive seasons in the 21st century without a losing season or something like that. Like, we know that now. I still don't probably put title or bust expectations at the beginning of the Les Miles era. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I fully agree. And I think
Okay.
looking back at that coaching search, honestly, LSU got lucky with what they got out of Les Miles. If
Agreed.
you look at his resume, kind of a much longer Gene Chizik situation where it's like, you hired who from where out there? And he doesn't really have ties over here. Like, if that hire was made today, it'd be like, this admin's losing it. And I think he just really, again, guy from Michigan that was at Oklahoma State, like, didn't really have like all these, like, he built them and he really fit in, which is weird. I think he was just weird, and Louisiana people like weird. So I'm with you, and but you're right. That's good context. That Saban was at the Dolphins whenever he was hired, so it wasn't this you or you. It was just kind of a rebuild. University of Oregon. Now there are two of these guys here. Do you think Dan Lanning is a title or bust guy?
Did Dan Lanning enter with expectations of title or bust? I don't think he did. Now, look, Mario Cristobal, I think that there would be people that would look at that situation and go, why wouldn't he be considered title or bust? Well, when the last guy leaves your job, I don't think, and he leaves your job for another job in college football, the way that Willie Taggart infamously did, I think it lowers the expectation. I think the expectation simply becomes stay here, win a lot of football games. I think for Dan Lanning, that was the expectation going in too, because Mario Cristobal did the same thing. And I think there was more so with a first-time head coach and understanding, all right, this is going to take a while. Everybody knows we're considered in college football the last team to have not won a national championship that feels like we've won a national championship because of how good they've been in the 21st century. But I wouldn't put that on Dan Lanning. Like, do I think Dan Lanning going into 2026 has title or bust expectations? Hell yeah, he does. Absolutely. But I don't think he left that job at Georgia, coming off a national championship team at Georgia in 2021, going to that job starting in 2022. I don't think he would have had that association from the jump.
Yeah, gosh, man, this is so crazy because like we're kind of going back to we talked about the most recent national champion before Indiana was Florida. We could look at the teams that have won
96
championships.
Florida.
Yeah, and that's a wide swath of time. And we can look at all the teams and coaches that have won within there. Plenty of them have not been championship expectations guys who have built it into that. Jimbo at FSU, I think was just leave this place not a disaster after Bobby Bowden.
Internal promotion. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, same thing you could kind of say going back to the Oregon thing real quick about Mark Helfrich, where it's like, hey, if you would just kept winning 9 games like you did your second to last season and not just crash out and win 4 games, is he fine? You know, because you obviously remember the highs of him, but I had forgotten how bad it got at the end there. Yeah, I don't think he's there either. So yeah, I think like for all these like very proud programs, like, I mean, when was the last time Tennessee had a championship or bust coach, man?
Fulmer replacing Johnny Majors. And even that, because he gets, very infamously, Johnny Majors gets pushed out and Fulmer steps into that situation. But yeah, I mean, that's probably one that would apply, albeit, 35 years ago. But I mean, was Lane in that spot when he came to Tennessee? I I think that's interesting. I think Tennessee fans might tell you yes. Maybe we should include Lane in Tennessee for that.
And I didn't mean to just pick on Florida for a second, but like again, these are the programs that are just right there, right? Recent competitors, recent championships. What is that next kind of tier in the SEC? Because I want to include some of these guys and think, hey, I talked to these fan bases, like they were really fired up, but being to your point, being really fired up, being juiced, being excited, not the same as championship or bust. I think Jimbo at A&M is a great one because he straight up said, "This is my trophy that I'm never
Yes.
going to get engraved. I'm just going to
Plaque.
but
Yeah.
the ROI on it was great. But yeah, outside of every Texas hire, I think is right there. Oklahoma, I mean, again, 2 internal guys essentially. You know, we could get kind of funky with that definition, but Lincoln Riley was the heir apparent. And then Venables was like, kind of the prodigal son. So I don't think either of those guys have championship or bust, even though Oklahoma is an incredibly proud program. Yeah,
Not
I'm
title or
there with you,
bust.
man.
It's when the breakup. It's when the breakup with Brent Venables. Different set of circumstances. Now, winning the breakup, part of that could be winning a title. Part of that could be winning the SEC and easing this transition, a transition that Lincoln Riley ran away from. But I don't think I would put that on him. And maybe people will be mad to hear like that. That's not the case. But maybe I'm being a little bit too practical and a little bit too realistic in saying that. But I just think there are so few situations where dude signs up and you just know championship or bust. So I think Lane is very much in that. And I don't think anybody would really deny it. I don't even think he would deny it. And I'll be interested to see if this kind of changes this discussion with now the playoff field having tripled and salaries for these coaches are now on average basically what they were 2 decades ago. So that kind of changes how we used to view these conversations. So maybe, there's more teams and programs in the country that have a bite at the apple, something that's very well documented. But for now, we can still, I think, point out when these situations are obvious. Lane's situation is obvious. It doesn't mean that he's doomed if year one is disappointing. If this $40 million roster doesn't live up to it, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden, like, he just can't win a national championship. It does mean that we get to criticize you in a way that we've never been able to criticize a year one coach. Okay. I always make the joke, like, we don't judge year one coaches on the show. Maybe we should judge a year one coach with a $40 million roster or more than $40 million. Like, go ask Mark Pope in year 2 with what everybody knows to be the most expensive roster in college basketball and how disappointing Kentucky's been. Go ask what it's like. Okay. When everybody knows that information and that's all just kind of out there. And yeah, maybe it's misinterpreted in some way or the other, but like, I think Mark Pope was brought into a situation in Kentucky where not just win the breakup with John Calipari, but truly title or bust of being able to say, hey, we are still in a good enough place where we have these resources. We don't have like NCAA sanctions or anything like that. We should be able to come in. And ultimately, Mark Pope's time in Kentucky was going to be whether or not he could win a national championship. And now he's probably going to be number one. Like, that's what happens when these two things are coexisting with one another. Lane Kiffin might not always have the most expensive roster in the sport. Okay. For all I know, that won't even be the case this year. I really don't know. But I do think that more coaches feel urgency to overspend to prove themselves. And I'm not saying that Lane has full control over the entire bank account and how it works, but like, you can have all the GMs in the world. You can have all the people, working to be able to recruit the portal and do all those things. Lane gets to decide how LSU is spending its money and how he gets to ask for it. He's trying to prove himself. Let's make no mistake about it, okay? He is trying to show that if you pour this gasoline on his transfer portal, retention fire, whatever you want to call it, that sucker will burn far and wide. And that is his number one goal in year one, okay? There is no undersell, over-deliver with that job. Not with the one that Lane Kiffin took over. Maybe there was kind of sort of with the 39 scholarship player thing with Brian Kelly. That is ancient history. That is a different era of LSU football that we're talking about. There's probably not going to be much benefit of the doubt at any point for the Kiffin era at LSU because I'm not sure if you've heard this, but $40 million rosters, or more than $40 million rosters, don't exactly they don't go back to the invention of the forward pass. So we don't have this great context for this. By the way, 1906, Teddy Roosevelt administration for that.
Yep.
They do go back to last year when Kirk Bohls reported that Texas spent between $35 and $40 million on its roster. And even then was kind of misinterpreted. And some of the context of that was lacking. I'm not saying this was bad reporting by Kirk. I'm saying the way that we in the public and the way that even Sarkisian kind of approached that comment, that felt like, whoa, 35 to $40 million. Like, what are we doing here? Like, that is just insane money. And that prompted a very annoyed Steve Sarkisian at SEC Media Days, or SEC spring meetings rather, to go on with my guy Peter Burns, and it was with Doring and Hester as well, if I recall, and say that it was irresponsible reporting and that he wished that they had $40 million on their roster. But this is what we need to remember with Lane Kiffin and this whole thing, and why you can't compare this to like 2 years ago even. The beginning of this new era was all about rev share. Okay. This was all the beginning of rev share last year in 2025. So it wasn't as if it was $40 million on NIL money. Okay. A good chunk of that with this house settlement bumped up that number. Okay. That was going to happen with everyone, especially the big spenders like the Texases and the LSUs of the world. Sark didn't go full 2022 Jimbo Fisher on the situation and treat it like Kirk Bohls was sliced bread from Bro Bible. We didn't get that. Also, Nick Saban probably, right in the face of Jimbo's frustration. But he did, however, seem very irked by this notion that Texas just had unlimited money and a perfect roster, the best roster that money could buy. Okay. And look, here's what we need to remember. Lane Kiffin has not taken that approach yet. Have you heard him at any point, Will? At any point so far during the speaking tour, when he's been on social media, have you heard anything that Lane has said to make you think that LSU is not spending that money? Because I have not.
No. Yeah. And that's honestly, and that was one thing I was very critical of Lane Kiffin about at Ole Miss consistently, is that he was just the first to be like, oh, well, we wanted to keep our defensive coordinator, but A&M stole him, or we wanted to have this player, but we didn't have enough money and we couldn't tamper, and we weren't one of the big dogs. And he's totally changed his tone since coming to LSU.
Yeah, I mean, as Trey Wallace told us on the show, that Lane could just go on a private jet, hang out at the Knoxville airport, and wait for Sam Leavitt to be able to re-recruit him. That's the type of money that you can spend right now at LSU. Okay, and Lane is instead leaning into this. He's tweeting out the just different mantra, which more or less explains why he left Ole Miss for LSU, as he said in his introductory press conference. I don't know that we can say with certainty that the price of this roster is hashtag just different, but the situation certainly is. Again, $18 million was the team that Brian Kelly bragged about last year. Okay. That was apparently tripled from the previous year. $6 million in NIL was what LSU was spending in the 2024 season that had, oh, by the way, not sure if you heard this, a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. Okay. That was 2 years ago, and rev share wasn't a thing yet. So the only bucket that we were speaking out of was this NIL bucket. And now there are so many more buckets that are going into this, and these numbers look like a blank check, because when you add $20.5 million worth of revenue share funds per school, at least in terms of the overall school athletic budget, you can spend this any freaking way you want. You just can't. And the number is going to continue to go up. What does Russillo always say? Cap's going to go up. Cap's going to continue to go up with this stuff until we get some sort of collective bargaining or something like that. Okay. The initial thing that got us here is going to keep driving up the price of all of this. That's the TV contracts. That's the only reason that Brian Kelly was able to fight LSU and get $54 million, though, again, we got the offset language in there. All of this is so ironic coming from Brian Kelly. It just is. And I'm kind of glad that he's the person that called this out, because it sheds some light on just how different this time is compared to the time that he coached at LSU. We only care about this right now because there isn't a salary cap. It's why we don't talk about this in the NFL. NFL's got the cap. I had to look this up.
Brian Kelly brought that up, by the way.
Oh,
In the
in the
interview,
interview?
he said the same thing that I've been saying, which is like, well, if you're not going to like have actual contracts for actual players that are not NIL, and until you get a union, you collective bargaining, these contracts are going to be made up, which I have not actually heard coaches say out loud. And that's another thing that Brian Kelly is not very good at, is like Lane Kiffin will tiptoe up to something and like almost say it. Brian Kelly will just straight up come out and be like, hey, I am going to win a championship here. Notre Dame is poor. We should have contracts. And that's why he isn't good with the media, because he says things like that that are going to upset all of his peers. Because I, as a college football dude on a podcast, can say that and I agree with it. I think it would be right. Like, I think it's the moral thing to do. But I'm sure he got lots of angry texts after that. Like, you're not supposed to say that, Brian. We don't want them to have a union.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that they want more rules, and they also, there are a lot of them that do not want a union and don't want to have to treat them as employees. But,
Because we could fix this tomorrow if people were on board with that. I mean, it would be easy. I think
yeah,
you just hit on it. If you get a salary cap, if you get a players union, if you get a collective bargaining agreement, this all goes away.
that's known. But the question is, are we supposed to care? You know what I mean? Are we really supposed to care about this? Because in the NFL, you don't care. You do not. Okay, look, I am diehard Bears fan. Lived and died with this team, especially this year, which I lived more than I died. Thank goodness, because it took too long. I had no idea. Literally, my friends, I have right now, I can pull up my phone. I have 7 unread texts from my friends about Bears free agency right now. Okay. That is just what we're doing on a Monday night in March. All right. That's what we do. And I had to look this up on Spot Track. I'm probably butchering how you say that. Everybody's seen it. You know what I'm talking about. The Bears had the most expensive 53-man roster in 2025 in the NFL. And it made no impression. Like, I did not look at I first of all, I didn't know that information. Even if I did know that information, I don't think that would have changed how I felt about Ben Johnson year one going in. I don't think that all of a sudden would have been like, oh, Ben Johnson, title or bust. You know what I mean?
I
Like,
mean,
that's the
see,
weird thing about it.
okay, like number one, I'm a New Orleans Saints fan, and so we've been like manipulating the cap. Like I could see Lane Kiffin signing 47 quote unquote punters. Like that would be the version of what Mickey Loomis has been doing for 10 years, where Taysom Hill is signing this massive contract, but it's all funny money and made up. Like, so the Saints fans have come under fire about the cap more than any other fan base, because every quote unquote capologist that doesn't get it as much as NFL employees, shocking, it will be like, well, you can't do that. You're going to be in cap hell. But I would argue, I kind of think you're in the minority here, because I'm more of on your side, where I'm like, who cares? But I think that people really do care about how much their team spends. And I mean, if you look at it, the Bears had like 8 tight ends on their roster year before last, and they brought in all these wide receivers, and it mattered, you know?
Here's the thing. Does it shape expectation? Does it shape expectation knowing the Browns had like the 3rd most expensive roster in the NFL?
Well, a lot of that's a certain human being. I think we understand why the Browns have that. But I mean, I think that from the Bears, you bring in Ben Johnson, you have, a young, promising quarterback, you spend on weapons, you spend on the running back. I think it matters.
Yeah, no, like I think it matters, but I don't think it does the shaping of expectations in the way that right now it does so much in college football, because you hear these numbers and it's hard not to react to that. It's hard not to hear, oh my God, like well north of $40 million for a coach that he's coached in how many playoff games? He's won how many conference titles? What? What are we
Well,
doing?
remember too, man, it's non-guaranteed contracts. So in the NBA, it absolutely matters. In the MLB, look at what the Dodgers are doing right now. Everybody cares about that. It's the fact that the cap is pretty funny in the NFL, and you can move guys around to where nothing feels permanent. But I think in the other revenue sports, I don't know much about hockey, but from what I understand, guys will sign 20-year, $10 million
Yes.
contracts up there. Maybe it's not as big up there, but I know in the other two sports, that's a huge deal.
We care more so in baseball now because of just how big of an outlier the Dodgers are. I'm saying maybe we should care less in college football a little bit, because I do think that there are teams that are going to continue to spend like that until they're told not to, and until there's actually someone that can step in and enforce this or regulate this and say, hey, this is actually well beyond what your rev share is supposed to be, and NIL, they're like, this isn't actually covering this, then I'm not going to think otherwise. Like, we saw it. Well, we talked about the College Sports Commission when it first formed last summer, right? And we all kind of wondered, are we going to see suspensions? Are we going to see teams that actually are going to have to come out with these numbers, and we're going to find out, oh, like maybe LSU did have this $40 million roster, but 10 million of it, they couldn't exactly line up where exactly that was coming from, or however this worked. Back in January, we saw all these headlines, right? We saw all these headlines about the College Sports Commission investigating LSU. And it was an investigation into the reporting of these NIL earnings. So you saw that headline initially and thought, oh man, the point that Brian Kelly would later make, maybe this is going to come back to bite LSU, that they're recruiting the number one class in the transfer portal. See, LSU's going to they're going to get got. They're not above the law. They can't exist in this world. Lane Kiffin, year one expectations, he thought he could just write a blank check. No, they're not going to be able to get beyond that. And then after the headline came out, Ross Dellinger reported that it wasn't related to football and that the issue was resolved. Like very quickly, that all happened. And it feels like the only goal right now of the CSE, the College Sports Commission, which took roughly half a year to have its first public inquiry, is basically just to not be considered the NCAA. They just wanted a different acronym and to receive a different reaction if and when it makes headlines. Anybody that talks about how expensive a roster is, like Brian Kelly did, is hoping to turn heads by saying it. And it's kind of hoping to do like what the College Sports Commission did, just operate out of fear because they can't possibly handle all of this. And I'm already kind of numb to it, Will. I think I am. I think I'm already at this place where I'm like, yeah, Texas, Ohio State, LSU, probably a handful of others. They're going to spend like that in this era as long as they are allowed to. And this era is different than what it was in 22 and 23. And I haven't changed how I feel about LSU under Lane Kiffin. You know what would make me change how I feel? If word got out that LSU's roster was really cheap. And all of a sudden, I'm going, wait a minute, Lane Kiffin, he showed up with title or bust expectations. Why is he having to prove himself in this sort of way? And is this actually, maybe I should not have title or bust expectations for him? And then we would really be firing up those discussions about what exactly the fit is going to be. And instead, like that is just not the case at all. And we're not talking about, oh my God, why would he leave Ole Miss to have another cheap roster at LSU? That's not going to be the case. Brian Kelly doesn't know it. But he actually could have caused more of a stir by saying this roster is going to be really cheap. This roster is going to be nothing. And who would have called him out on that, Will? If Brian Kelly had come out and said, he's like, you know what, Dusty? You know what, Danny? I think this LSU roster is going to be like $5 million. And these guys that are getting out of the transfer portal, they're signing up for nothing. Actually, you know what? That probably comes back to Brian Kelly and bites him. Because that's like, wait, what do you mean they're going there for just next to nothing and they're still
Lane Kiffin's linking bank statements. He's at the Chase Bank. He's like, no, this is me handing cash to a child. This is he's like, get your money up, not your funny up, Brian. Like, I think Lane would be so offended by that because that's why he picked LSU at the end of the day. And again, in the back of my mind, I said, okay, how do we compete with Florida or, these other schools that are out there? And FSU apparently got very close and then looked at the NIL number and balked, right? And so like, yeah, I think that was the promise that was delivered. It would be LSU backing off on what they promised. There would be I feel like a justifiably so unhappy Lane Kiffin who signed up for something and Jeff Landry backed down on him.
It would have been it was going to be a lose-lose for Brian Kelly no matter what. Brian Kelly usually just takes L's when he opens his mouth, and Lane usually doesn't. He usually doesn't. You might not like the way that he leaves, but when he opens his mouth and actually speaks, usually he finds a way to win whatever sort of war on social media or at a press conference. And he very often is on the right end of those things, at least in terms of public perception. This LSU thing has certainly tested that. There's no doubt about it. The best thing you can do with all these conversations, how expensive is this roster? How expensive is that roster? This roster that I left, how are they getting all this support? Just, if you're a coach, win a national championship, and then in the post-game press conference, say that your NIL is actually nowhere near where people think it is. That's just really the best way to do it. Do you know who did that, Will? Do you know
who did that, Connor?
I think it was the guy who won a national title, like, what was it, 2 months ago? Less, like a month and a half ago. I think his name was Kurt with a C. Even he had to fight that, though. Like, if Kiffin does that, it would be the ultimate flex. If Lane Kiffin at one point during his time at LSU is getting up there and he's talking about winning a ring, getting this monkey off the back, and then he just goes full Saban mode and just shifts it into overdrive about next year's roster, that will be the biggest win of Lane Kiffin's career, bar none, is being able to have that statement in that moment. And as of right now, it's just money, it's just hype, and it's just expectation. But it's title or bust expectation.
Yes. And I thought of a guy while you were talking about it. I wanted to derail you too hard. Do you think Hugh Freeze at Auburn was title or bust?
No, okay. No. You replaced Brian Harsin.
Yes, but the amount of egg they had on their face and kind of where he came from, I think was a little similar to the Brian Kelly because it was us against the world. And it was like, we're choosing winning over morality is where I see that.
It was don't make us the butt of the joke expectation, and he failed.
I feel like with Hugh Freeze, that's kind of, yeah, you're right. And I think that's it's interesting that they viewed themselves there. I think they ponied up for it, didn't work out. Um, yeah, I think just to put a bow on all this, right? We've talked about coaching salaries forever, and my statement has always been these are donors, these are rich dudes, and however rich this is capitalism, this is America. It's not our tax dollars, contrary to what Jeff Landry erroneously thought, and then was proven wrong that it's not our tax dollars, it's some rich donor. If they want to go build a statue to themselves in their own backyard, I don't care, right? So if I would rather it help me and be something cool, or like a zoo, maybe, something that helps me. So that's fine with me. But I do think we did hit on something that's pretty interesting, which is that, again, the NFL is famously, there's no competition in the sport of football in the way there is in the EuroLeague or in baseball, where a guy can go play somewhere else, which is, I think, what has gotten the numbers to where they are in other sports, because you've seen it in different sports, in golf, in women's basketball, where like a live or these different leagues across the world can go poach players. And so that's why contracts are where they are in the NFL, right? But they're grown men. So I mean, you have to have guaranteed contracts if you go in that direction for college, because the optics of saying you got this 18-year-old kid who just blows up his leg, Marcus Lattimore style, and we're just going to cut him and give him nothing, I think is like the worst outcome.
And I think that coaches would take a worse PR hit if it leaked that were the case. I think that would probably cause more harm if that were something that they wiggled out of. There is a scorned ex that would blow the whistle on that if that were to happen. So this is all changing. And this is
as
all
Brian
changing.
Kelly had at LSU. Anyway.
Yeah. There are, if you are treating this with the same context of a couple of years ago when it comes to like roster building and stuff, I would get away from that. I would say just treat this era for an entirely different era. But at the same time, it is so weird to think that Lane Kiffin, despite how unique this time is, how unique this situation is doing the thing that 10, 11 other coaches have done in the last 20 years. And that is truly enter with title or bust expectations. And maybe Brian Kelly, or maybe he did, or maybe he didn't remind us of that with how expensive his roster is. All right, well, let's kick it to our guy, Aaron Murray. Great to be able to talk with Aaron. Talked a lot of Georgia stuff, a lot about Gunnar Stockton and his development, Arch Manning, and what he was able to show as a year one starter, Aaron's records, just in case. Hey, if you're a historian like I am, these things matter. And I'm always keeping tabs on Aaron's records. So let's get to our guy, Aaron Murray. I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is the SEC's all-time passing leader and touchdown passes leader. It is the one and only Aaron Murray. Speaking of that, Aaron, your records they're incredibly important to me personally, as someone who gets to talk about them all the time. They survived a really important era. Like you are now past the COVID extra year where there would have been like maybe an asterisk if they had been broken, but there is also not an active player in the SEC who's in the top 5 in either career passing yards or career passing touchdowns. So I think your records are going to survive the 2020s after look, the start that they got off to, I was really putting them in question.
Oh, I agree, especially with the way offenses are nowadays. I mean, I think when, my records were set in an offense that still was pretty much run dominant. We had guys like Todd Gurley, Keith Marshall. We were in the I formation. We didn't have all the RPOs where, you had the option to really throw the football every other time if the box was heavy. And now we get to this more of a spread offenses, up-tempo offenses, throw the ball 40, 50 times a game for some of these teams. And so there's just more opportunities. Think back to, Mike Leach at Mississippi State. I mean, their quarterback broke one of my records for completions, but they're throwing the ball 50, 60 times a game. So, yeah, I survived the COVID extra year, but there is obviously the scare of these players going to get 5 years to play. You're going to have your normal 4 years, then you can maybe redshirt and still play 9 games in a season. So it's just, it's not I'm not frustrated from I'm worried about my record standpoint. I'm more frustrated because the beauty of college football has always been you come, you play, you move on, and then the next batch of players come in. The high school guys, the guys that have been sitting the bench for 2 or 3 years, that have been grinding, waiting their turn. And obviously there's a lot that needs to get changed in college football, from the transfer portal and guys needing to be able to stay and honor a contract for X amount of years, wherever that is, 2-3 years before they're allowed to move to a new university. And then guys just moving on, going on to the rest of their life, going to the NFL, going to get a job, whatever they may be, to allow that next group of guys, once again, to have an opportunity to live out their dreams as a college football player. So some of those things to me just really need to get cleaned up. And if they do, then to your point, I'll feel even better going forward about maybe some of my records. But there's still going to be chances for these guys to be able to play 5 and 6 years.
Noted Trinidad Chambliss hater, Aaron Murray. Look,
I think he ain't going to catch me, 2 years. But I am a big fan of him. But still, like, having 24, 25-year-olds playing college football is just still one every now and then. You get the Chris Winkies of the world that played baseball and came back to play football. I get that. But, man, it is such an advantage when you've played college football for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, over a guy that's a freshman or a sophomore that's played, maybe 12 or 13 games in their career. Just like anything in life, the more reps you get, the better you're going to get, the more confident you're going to be. And some of these guys are just playing it at an incredible level. I mean, think of Tom Brady, later on in his life. He's like, dude, there's nothing you can throw at me that I haven't seen. I've played football for almost 2 decades, or maybe what it was 2 decades. I've seen everything. I've gone against every defense. I know this offense. It just essentially was too easy for him, even at the age of 43, 44. So I would like it to get back to the old college football. 4 years, or you get 5 years to play 4, and that's it. That's done. Move on. Let the freshmen, sophomores get their chance.
Or alternatively, if there are going to be these extensions of college careers, and you got 24 and 25-year-olds, Leonardo DiCaprio girlfriend rule, age limits, just rule out the rest of this certain age group. You can't be in your mid-20s and breaking Aaron Murray's record.
No.
Like, that's just ridiculous. You're fine, though. I looked this up. I even did some math. Like, Marcel Reed, active leader in the SEC with 5,407 career passing yards, 41 passing touchdowns. He would need a couple of 4,000 passing yard seasons, 40 touchdown seasons. Like, Arch, if he stays through 2027 and puts up big numbers, he would have to average 4,532 passing yards, 43 and a half touchdown passes. I think we need to be turning the page to whether or not Maddox, your son, can break your records. Because that's like, it's going to be kids that are like right around his age group that we're probably going to be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you need 4 years. I mean, even with these offenses nowadays, unless you're throwing your first 3 seasons 40 touchdowns a year, which is very difficult to do, even in an offenses. And I think too, these guys have extra games. I mean, if you make a nice playoff run, there's 3 or 4 extra games right there you can play, and I believe those stats go to your overall stats for your career. So there's definitely more games, more opportunities, but still a lot of touchdowns. And I don't know if I would have gotten it if we would have beat Alabama in the 2012 SEC championship game. I probably would have gone pro after that season because we would have played Notre Dame. We would have won that game. And it wasn't a very heavy draft class that year of quarterbacks. I remember having that conversation with my parents, like, hey, listen, and my coaches and, some agents or whoever we're talking to at the time, this is not a big time quarterback draft class. Very few guys, very similar to this year's draft class, probably even weaker than this one because you don't have a Fernando Mendoza bona fide, number 1 pick in the NFL draft. It would be smarter for me to come out this year than the year that I did come out because I think we had 5 guys drafted in the first round in 2013. So just a lot more quarterbacks, a lot more competition. And obviously I ended up getting hurt too, which didn't help things in the senior year. So, I don't think I would have broken the record and played 4 years had we won that game, had we won a national championship. But, as a competitor and someone who wants to win a championship, to get that close, to get 4 yards away from winning the SEC to going to a national championship, it was hard to not say, hey, I want to give it one more go. And the focus was never on, hey, I want to come back to break records. The focus was, I want to come back to essentially finish the business of winning a championship. It just so happened that along the way, I hit that 4-year mark, was able to get all those records.
I don't think I've ever heard you say that. I don't think I've ever heard you say that before, that you would have gone pro. Had you?
I mean, that year it was EJ. I think EJ was the only AJ Manuel was the only first round quarterback taken. I think it had EJ, it had Geno, it had what's his name from Kansas State? That's not the head coach. Drawing a blank.
Colin Klein.
Yeah, Colin Klein. There wasn't a lot. He was a mid round guy too. So there just wasn't a lot of quarterbacks in that draft. So and plus I was coming off my best season after my junior season. So it would have been smarter for me to come out that year than the year with, Bortles and Bridgewater and Manziel and Carr and we had we had just so many quarterbacks that got drafted that season. So yeah, it would have been definitely smart for me to walk out as a champion. Like I said, as a quarterback, I've said this over and over again, kind of my case for Stetson Bennett as the greatest quarterback in Georgia history. You know, your stats are great, they're fun, they're sexy, but we play the game to win championships. And if I would have won a championship, I would have done everything that I wanted to do at Georgia. I would have won an SEC championship game. I would have won a national championship. There would be really no reason for me. I would have played 3 years. So when it comes to the amount of games played, I don't think staying would have helped me as a quarterback. I would have played 40 games at that point, something like that. So I didn't need more games under my belt. I would have left after that year and gone pro had we won that game versus Alabama.
That's crazy. Win against Alabama, and then even if you had lost against Notre Dame, which that's the possibility that literally nobody could ever accept that would happen. I think Georgia, you guys would have won by 3 touchdowns at least.
Yes.
Like you still would have gone to the NFL even if you had lost that game to Notre Dame. It was all about the Bama game.
See, I don't know. I think that obviously I would have seen how I felt. I think it's very similar feeling of you still want to win a championship and you got there, you didn't get it done. Let's come back and try it again. So I would say if we beat Alabama, lost to Notre Dame, probably would have come back to give it another go and utilize that year. Because it's all about the rings, man. It's all about winning championships, which makes what Stetson did, those back-to-back national championships, to me just incredibly special and deserving of that number 1 spot of the best quarterback in Georgia history. And probably a top 5 player in Georgia history too. And he had the stats to back it up as well. I mean, he played terrific for those 2 seasons. He was a multiple-time MVP in the playoffs and in the championship game. He had his best games in the biggest moments, and he led Georgia and helped lead Georgia to 2 national championships. And no other quarterback has done that. So yeah, he's number 1. That was always my goal at the end of the day too.
Last year, you were right around this time. You were talking about how you weren't buying the arch hype, and you talked about a 7th rounder. You couldn't beat out a 7th rounder for the starting job. What was your feeling watching him this past year? Do you feel vindicated at all for having that take?
Yeah, because my take was always, let's not crown him before he's actually played a season. I think that there was no doubt that there was. He's a good quarterback. Obviously, he's going to be very, very intelligent, high IQ from just the genes and where he's come from, and his uncles and his grandfather, and obviously his father played football as well. So he was going to know the X's and O's. He was with Steve Sarkisian, who to me is still a top 5, top 10 offensive mind in college football. He's with a bunch of talent around him. Like he's going to be successful. But it was just driving me crazy that the entire offseason leading up to the season, everyone was crowning him the Heisman favorite, that they were crowning him the first pick in the NFL draft come 2026. And my big message was like, we've seen him play limited games. When he did play big time competition, it wasn't great. Like think back to 2024 versus Georgia. He didn't come in there and light the world on fire. He had some good moments against lesser opponents. Great. Plenty of quarterbacks can come in there and have great moments against lesser opponents. But you did see a quarterback that I thought was average to good moments early in the season last year. A lot to do, and I felt like I defended him a lot to do with how bad the offensive line was. I thought the offensive line for Texas was abysmal for the majority of the season. I thought the receivers were just okay compared to a year ago, but he gained confidence. He got better. He got more accurate. His footwork looked better. The arm strength improved. So overall, like I think he's a good quarterback. I just needed to see a full season of it before I start crowning him, like the number 1 pick in the NFL draft come, a month from now and a Heisman favorite. So I think he did improve enough to where I can sit back and say right now, heading into 2027, he should be one of the best quarterbacks in America. Obviously, they got incredible talent in what they did in the transfer portal. If the offensive line improves and it gives him the opportunity to sit in the pocket and do what he needs to do from a quarterback standpoint, he should have a special 2026 season with an opportunity to lead Texas to a championship, with an opportunity to be in the Heisman conversation, and then from there be in the conversation for the number 1 pick or top quarterback pick come 2027. He just was not ready a year ago. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with waiting for someone to develop. Not everyone has to be a Trevor Lawrence, like shows up from their first season and is just absolutely perfect. There's guys need a year, 2 years to really get into it, and he utilized it, got better, and I'm excited to see what he can do now.
Who would you rather have for 2026, Arch or Gunner?
Woo! Um, right now I would say Arch. I think Arch is a better passer. I think Arch has the athleticism that Gunner has. I think Arch has a love for the game that is both of them do. Both of them want to compete. Both of them are willing to put their body on the line. So if you want to kind of go down the list of attributes, I think both really really good athletes. I think great teammates, passionate about the game of football, smart, high IQs when it comes to the quarterback position. I just think Arch has more of an ability, at least right now, to make all the passes. And hopefully Gunner, uses this offseason to improve on some areas. And we saw those improvements at times last year, being able to layer the football, get it up and over, second level guys, hit those deep cross routes, hit those seam routes. I saw improvements through the season last year which is hard to do, to be able to adapt that fast in season. Usually those things have to come in an off season. So if he's able to make those strides come, the spring ball, summer and fall camp, he'll put himself in the conversation to be once again one of the best quarterbacks in America. But if you had to say, hey, Aaron, pick a quarterback for 2027 that you want to lead your team, it's super close. Don't get me wrong. We're talking about two of the top 5 quarterbacks in college football. But I would definitely lean Arch and just his, a little bit better passer right now in his career.
Okay, and your totally unbiased opinion. Who would you rather have in your ear, Sark or Bobo?
Woo! In my ear. Well, the new Bobo is definitely a little bit more chill compared to the old Bobo, So I
What
don't
was
know
the
if I
old
would
Bobo
want
like, Aaron? Was he
old Bobo
calm?
was screaming, yelling, cussing, I think now that Kirby, but you have to be fair. Mark Rick was the head coach, and Coach Rick wasn't that personality. Coach Rick wasn't the one with the megaphone during practice, yelling, screaming, getting after guys. He allowed, Bobo to do his thing, to be on the guys. He allowed obviously Grantham to do his thing on the defense side of the football, where Kirby's a little bit more obviously aggressive. Yeah, everyone knows. I mean, you can't. Everyone knows in Athens when practices, because you can hear him for about a half a mile to a mile around campus screaming and yelling. So I think Bobo doesn't have to be as much as he was with me back in the day, because he lets Kirby do it. But I would love to do both. I've heard nothing but great things from Sark. Like I said earlier, I think Sark's one of the best offensive minds in college football. I think that when he has everything that he needs, from an offensive line to receivers to an experienced quarterback, you can have one of the best offenses. I think that's what he's going to have next year. He's going to have skill players. He's going to have an experienced quarterback that's a dual threat guy. And like I said, hopefully a better offensive line than what he had a year ago. So he should be able to get the job done. And you could say the same thing for Bobo.
I'm really interested in Isaiah Canyon coming over from Georgia Tech. It seems like he could develop into that go-to guy. It seems like Georgia's relying on him a lot. I mean, is there a level of concern you have knowing how much Georgia is really banking on Isaiah Canyon and London Humphreys to be the 2 veterans in that room?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think you're relying on them. And I think you are going to see some more of, kind of what when Georgia was really rolling on offense, the use of tight ends. They loved their freshman tight end from a year ago. You saw him come in and play. Obviously, getting Lawson lucky to come back too. You saw him have some really, really special moments during last season. So you have 2 athletic tight ends, big body tight ends. You can get in 12 personnel. And then honestly, that's like that to me, that's one of my favorite personnel groups in football right now. And you see it used in the NFL. Obviously, you see it in the college ranks as well. You just can create so many matchups with those bodies, those almost like basketball forward type bodies, 6'3", 6'4", that can run. So I think Bobo's going to be able to use the tight ends a little bit more to help. But yeah, I've said it for years. The receiving position has been a major issue for Georgia. But you look at Cannon, you look at Humphreys. They've recruited well. I mean, they have 3 top guys a year ago, 5-star and a couple 4-star receivers, the highest, essentially the highest group of receivers Georgia has recruited in quite some time. Those guys have to develop. Those guys have to go out there and make plays. So, this goes back to what we talked about earlier. There's so much emphasis nowadays in the transfer portal, getting guys with experience. And there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, it worked a year ago for Indiana, but I still think Kirby has the mentality of, we're going to recruit really good high school guys. We're going to develop them, and you're going to fill in the blanks with the transfer portal. You just have to trust us that the guys that we're developing, while they maybe haven't played a lot, they're still 4 and 5 star guys. So I think that this year Georgia really needs to make sure that those 4 and 5 star guys they've gotten in the past year or two at the receiving position, they have to be able to go out there and execute at a high level this year. And I think part of it has to be with Gunner too. Gunner has to be a better passer of the football. I thought he was really good a year ago, really, really good a year ago. I still think that he can be even better. And I think the more trust Bobo and Kirby have with Gunner throwing the football vertically down the field, you're going to see guys emerge besides the two that you just mentioned, along with those tight ends, and hopefully make a more balanced passing attack for the Bulldogs.
It does kind of remind me of like the situation that you had in 2013 post Malcolm Mitchell injury, where you just kind of lacked a go-to guy, or you at least didn't know who that was going to be at the start of the year. Very different than being a redshirt freshman and knowing, hey, when AJ Green comes back from suspension, like,
Yeah,
well, I'm gonna have a go-to guy. Not gonna
there
have
you
to worry
go.
about that. Do we overrate that in the media of like not having a go-to guy? Surely one can emerge, and maybe there's gonna be talk about that in the spring. But like, is that something that should be considered a legitimate concern going into the season? Of like, hey, this quarterback only has a certain amount of completions with this group
Yeah.
of pass catchers. Like, how big is that?
I think it's big for everyone. I think it's big, obviously, for any quarterbacks confident in those receivers to go out there and make plays. I think it's big confidence for the receivers too, to know that you can go out there and execute at a high level. So, confidence is a big part of the game. And if you haven't done something and you haven't executed as a combination of quarterback to receiver consistently, that takes time. But I mean, you look a year ago, Gunnar was playing for his first time as a quarterback. Really, I mean, he had a great game. I thought coming in versus Texas, I thought he played really well versus Notre Dame. But you're still talking about a first year starting quarterback. And what did Georgia do? They brought in Zachariah Branch, and you know. We're all excited about it, but if you look at Zachariah's stats heading into his 2 years or 3 years, whatever it was at USC,
Too.
they weren't anything crazy. There was always a lot of hype about Zachariah Branch, about how athletic he is. And obviously, a lot of had to do with how well he was in special teams and the punt returns. But there's always this hype with him. But then you look at the stats, you're like, well, the stats are good. They're not great. They're not all American stats. So you have a highly amped up, we're all excited about this guy that has, good stats, not great stats, coming in with a first year quarterback. And then look what he did. That combination between those two guys a year ago was absolutely tremendous. So I would still lean on an experienced quarterback, a guy that's been in the system, Gunner, a guy that's now played 15, 16 games, can hopefully elevate the inexperience around him. I would rather have an experienced quarterback with talent around him that can make those guys and give those guys build the confidence within them, heading into a season, which what Georgia has right now. They have young talent, they have inexperienced talent, they have some tight ends that can kind of balance it off early on and allow the receivers to kind of grow within the system with Gunner.
You started as a redshirt freshman. We've sort of gotten away from that a little bit in college
Yeah.
football. Tennessee could be in that spot this year if George McIntyre wins the job, or if Faison Brandon wins the job and he starts as a true freshman. No two situations are exactly the same, of course, but do you look at those situations now with more skepticism, having lived it, knowing how challenging that first month on the job can be?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I think it's more anxiety for fans nowadays too, especially that position. It's like, to me, it feels like if you lose a quarterback, everyone's like, well, let's go to the portal. Let's go to the portal. We need an experienced quarterback. We need experience. So I honestly feel bad for young quarterbacks, because it's like, how am I supposed to get experience if I can't, if you don't give me that opportunity? And that's when you have to just trust the coaches, that the coaches in that room, have seen these guys, have trust the guys, that, hey, we have everything we need right now in Knoxville or Athens or Tuscaloosa or wherever it may be, to go out there and compete at a high level. And I think fans get a little bit antsy at that position. So I love the fact when guys are able to kind of sit for a year or two, learn the offense, and you have to trust the track record of what Tennessee's been able to do at the quarterback position. It's an offense that, you say all you want that it's quarterback friendly, but there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of, what I see has to be exactly what the receiver sees. The timing has to be impeccable. I thought the offense grew a lot a year ago with Joey when it comes to throwing the ball over the middle of the field. which really opened them up and turned them into one of the best offenses once again in the SEC. So, like I said, that staff knows what it takes to run that offense at a high level. And if they believe that those guys are the right guys for the offense, they should be fine. Like I said, it's difficult in the sense of you have to be on the same page with the receivers. But once you get it down, man, it's a really fun offense to be a part of. Obviously, you'll put up some crazy stats. It's not my favorite in the sense of I just still don't think it's complementary enough to be able to truly compete for championships. But when it comes to getting a quarterback to go out there and execute at a high level, I think those guys will be ready to go.
That was nicer than what you said about the Jeremy Pruitt offense at Tennessee. That was way nicer.
Well, I don't know if I say anything about the Jeremy Pruitt offense. I
Yeah,
just
that's
think
true.
more
Just Pruitt.
who's running the show there.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. The transfer quarterbacks in the SEC, it looks like they're going to have a huge say in how the league shakes out this year. Let's say that the SEC will strip Aaron Murray passing records if you get this wrong. No pressure. Between Sam Levitt, Byron Brown, Kenny Minchie, Aaron Philo, Austin Simmons, and I don't know which guys you've had a chance to look at so far or which guys like you know better than others, but of those guys, who would you bet on being an all SEC quarterback in 2026?
Yeah, I'm going to put my money on Sam Levitt. I talked about with top coaches and top offensive minds in college football. I think Lane Kiffin is at the top of that list. What he's been able to do, developing quarterbacks, the offenses, and doing that at Ole Miss. And Ole Miss has done a great job. Obviously, that fan base is completely bought in. From an NIL standpoint, they've really opened up their checkbook to bring in top talent on both sides of the football to compete for championships. But as we know, and I kind of talked about all last year, LSU is just more consistent with that. LSU is going to be able to get top tier talent a little bit easier than Ole Miss year in and year out. And part to do with Louisiana's just got so much talent, and they own the state. People in that state want to go to LSU, and we've seen year after year after year after year elite receivers sometimes come out of nowhere, 2-star guys, 3-star guys turn to NFL guys. So I think the combination of Lane Kiffin, how good he is as a play caller, Sam Levitt, and what he's been able to do for the past years. I had an Arizona State. I actually had the game a year ago that he got hurt. So obviously did a lot of film breakdown leading into the game, had an opportunity to watch him for at least a half before he went down with the injury. And I love him, man. He's a competitor. He's a great athlete. He's a willing runner. He's a very good thrower of the football. So I think you pairing experienced quarterback, has all the tools you want with Lane Kiffin, with the talent that we know LSU is going to have. I think Sam Levitt and LSU are going to have a special year. Like, I think LSU could compete for an SEC championship and for a playoff spot come 2026.
Last one for you. I don't think I've asked you QB1 in the SEC for 2026. Don't worry about NFL draft stuff. Don't worry about anything, 5-star recruit, this, that, or the other. Who's going to be your guy when you have to come out with those rankings and probably have talking about them like Red Ron Media Days?
I probably lean on Arch. I just think, like I said, the way
you.
he finished the season, I was super impressed with the bowl game. I thought he was terrific in that bowl game. The arm strength got better. There's some kooky stuff that we saw early on the season. Think back to the Ohio State game where it's like, man, is he hurt? What's going on? The ball's not really popping out. And I think a lot has to do with confidence. When you're not confident throwing the football, and obviously Ohio State's defense was elite. You're playing on the road. But when you're not confident, it's like me trying to hit a golf swing. If I got a club in my hand, I'm not confident, and I, probably going to miss the ball or, skull it or chunk it. You got to go up there with confidence. And the same thing's playing with quarterback position. The ball's not going to pop if you're worried about making a mistake or you're worried about what you're seeing out there. So I think now that he's had that full season, he's confident in the offense. He's confident executing it. He's confident playing in the SEC. You're going to really see all the tools in the tool bag come out for Arch Manning this year. So I think he would probably be my number one and kind of Chambliss right behind him. I'm interested to see what Chambliss looks like, without the, his OC and obviously head coach coming into the season. But I love the way that he played all year, a year ago. So I'd kind of probably lean on those two with Gunnar kind of coming right behind him.
This is the art of the take. This is exactly it right now. This is the fully formed take of being on the other side of it, going in and then being like, oh, actually, you know what? I realize everybody's backing off now. Now is when I'm going to buy stock. I've done the same thing with Bobo. So we're all Yeah, we're all just morphing our opinions over the course of time. Nothing is ever locked in forever. Aaron, you're the best, man. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, let's close with some lad of the week. Yeah, I feel like we've done a lot of famous figures who have died lately. A lot of eulogies in lad of the week. I am continuing that. I've got Lou Holtz. I figured one of us would have him. Someone who meant a lot in the history of college football. And I think if you close your eyes and think of peak Notre Dame, depending on how old you are, if you're, what is it, Gen X or less, you probably think of Lou Holtz, maybe Ara Parseghian, someone like that. Or if you are of my generation, you think of him with Mark May, with Reese Davis, just sitting there arguing about nothing. The original First Take. God, it was so entertaining to watch those three and to watch how mad Lou Holtz would get with Mark May. And it's honestly like one of the things that drew me into college football is that as someone that didn't necessarily grow up with this constant team, I could watch those two kind of argue about anything, and it was great. And Chris Vanini had the tweet of like kids today will never know how much joy that provided us. And honestly, it provided kind of a second win to his relevance in college football. And I remember, so I have one Lou Holtz story. When I was in college at Indiana, my mentor, Terry Hutchins, who unfortunately is no longer with us, I was in one of his sports journalism classes, and he at the time was Indiana beat reporter for the Indianapolis Star. And he says to me one day, he's like, "Hey, I'd love for you to be able to like sit in on an interview that I'm going to do afterwards. It's with Lee Corso." It was early on in football season. Lee Corso, obviously on College Game Day at the time, former Indiana coach, makes a lot of sense. I'm like, yes, I'm there. I will stay after. So he calls up this number that he gives him, and it's like, an ESPN line or something like that. And the person on the other end of the line, like working for ESPN, says, "Hey, it's actually not going to be Lee Corso. It's going to be Lou Holtz." And he's like, "Oh, okay. I guess that works." And in my head, I'm thinking, oh, this is just something that happens in journalism all the time. I've literally never seen that happen except like it did that very day, which is kind of crazy, where someone just threw, like, I've never sat down to do one of these interviews and it's like set up by a PR agency or something like that. And they just give me a different person at the
Little
last
formation
second.
sub, a little spell back there. He's in the restroom. We got Lou Holtz for you. He's going to be our third down back today.
Just a last second audible, just completely out of nowhere. And so I see the look in Hutch's face, and Hutch is just like, "All right, I guess we'll roll with this. This will be a good lesson on adapting. Adapt to your surroundings. You never know what you're going to get thrown at as a reporter. Let me show this college student how exactly this works." So we talked with Lou Holtz for probably like 20, 25 minutes on the phone. And he couldn't have been nicer. He could have been nicer, like asked about like my background and stuff like that. And the person that I knew him to be on TV was like very different. Obviously, he plays it up a little bit with, the Mark May stuff, but was so sweet. And when I told people afterwards, and it's something that like I've kept in my mind too, even if you like, whether you agree or disagree with like who like Lou Holtz became like later in his life and like his stances and whatnot, like you only have your personal experiences with a person. And what I told my friends after, I said the weirdest thing was his lisp was not there. He did not have a lisp on the phone. And that was the number one thing that I was thinking of when I heard of this last second audible going from Lee Corso to Lou Holtz was, oh my God, over the phone, Lou Holtz. I'm not going to be able to understand a word this guy says. You would never know, Will.
This is a scandal. From the people that brought you, was Tim Tebow really crying?
Honest to God.
Did Lou Holtz actually have a lisp? RIP.
I was amazed. I was absolutely amazed. But it was an experience that I look back on very fondly, and I was grateful. Lou Holtz had like a lot of, it wasn't just like about a conversation about Indiana, but just about college football in general. And it was cool. And like he cared that I was in the room. Like a lot of people just, oh yeah, you got a 20-year-old kid that's in the room. Congratulations, cool. I'm going to talk about college football and then get out of here. But like really wanted to dig into my background, and also a good reminder. College football coaches, the best recruiters in the world. They are so true. They will relate to a rock. They are unbelievable at that. So rest in peace, Lou Holtz, man, that brought a lot of joy, not just to, fans of Notre Dame and Arkansas, of course, and South Carolina fans, like just college football fans as a whole.
Easy to forget that Lou Holtz is an SEC legend. I guess he never coached in the SEC because Arkansas wasn't in the SEC back then. But yeah, I
No,
mean,
it's
he
South
has.
Carolina. South Carolina,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. Duh. I like flipped that. But yeah, I mean, but yeah, that being said, I think that you talked about Mark May. That reminded me of like just a hilarious moment that is like so embarrassingly high in my college football like pantheon of things. There's a clip of Lou Holtz just being exasperated at something Mark May said, and they put it to the beat of Lifestyle by Rich Homie Quan. And it's just lifestyle. And this Lou Holtz just like, just freaking out on Mark May. And like, that is like one of my favorite college football moments of all time. I love that so much. And unfortunately, we also lost Rich Homie Quan in 2024. So that era of college football gone. But yeah, I mean, see, like to your point, you can talk about his stances later in life and stuff. But everybody that I know that talked to him said he was an awesome dude, except for Ryan Day, who I think could now rest a little bit easier at night that his number one nemesis is no longer with us. But that's the only guy who had a negative review, about like Lou Holtz, the person that like met you and shook your hand and everything. So seemed to be an awesome dude, in person.
Well, what position did Lou Holtz play?
Oh gosh, man.
I just looked this up because
I'm
I
gonna
was like,
say, let's see. I'm gonna say corner.
that man was a linebacker.
That would have been my next guess. But like guys back then could just play guard. That's the thing. Like you see some guys from back in the day, you're like, how did you do that?
Yeah, how did you play nose tackle? I was trying to see if I could find his weight at the time that he played linebacker because he played linebacker at Kent State. But I don't think they have like his weight anywhere in here. Man, I would love to know. But Lou Holtz, just a college football lifer. Man, to think 44 years to spend coaching, and that doesn't even include his time as a player and whatnot, but half a century essentially to college football. Rest in peace, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's been a unique voice for sure. I don't mean that like literally. It's just always brought interesting perspective.
Yeah, you did. You meant that a little bit. You meant that a little bit. That's okay.
And so, yeah, my guy, I thought about it for a minute. I'm going to hit you with a little audible. This is easy. I don't know why this didn't immediately come to me. Toto Wolff, the team principal for Mercedes-AMG Petronas. They are so back in F1. And I joked about this with John.
I was going to have to ask you what you were talking about.
Yes, I got all the nomenclature out there. But yeah, I talked about this with John. I didn't even watch qualifiers. I went to a little F1 party the other day. I'm picking George Russell. Didn't even know he was first. Didn't even know he was on pole. Didn't know his teammate Kimi Antonelli was number 2. I just knew. Coming into this season, when the regulations change and you have that type of a psycho German freak like Toto Wolff, who has been just slowly killing his enemies and dragging them into the forest forever in that sport, who's outlasted his nemesis, Christian Horner. He found a way to adapt when his team seemed like they were down and out. They did not have a good season last year. They lost Lewis Hamilton, obviously. It was like, what is Mercedes going to be? And they found a way to win with a very cheap roster compared to their competitors. You look at Ferrari with Leclerc and Hamilton as this insane $1 million or $100 million plus roster, and they're also still paying Christian Horner. So championship or bust mentality over there. He went cheap and he paid his engineers, which he always does. He pays his engineers. He pays the guys in your your headset. And so I think that he's just a genius. And I knew it was going to happen. I knew he was going to come out on top. They have built an absolute spaceship. There was one clip of him looking at the camera after testing where he just like smiled at the camera. And it was like, bad news for you guys because McLaren won pretty easily last year. Well, not in the end, but they should have won pretty easily in the end. And there was like a down year for Mercedes with new regulations changing. I just had a feeling that the most prepared team was going to win. And early, it looks great for Mercedes. So shout out Toto, who is an adapter die guy. He's been through more regulation changes than like anyone in the sport. They're all electric cars now. And he's like, perfect. I love the environment.
I have now had 2 conversations about F1 in the last 24 hours. And both of which blew me away. And as someone who does not obviously consume the sport, I can say that if you stay up past midnight for a sport, which 11 o'clock start, you had to stay up past midnight, I think that officially punches your ticket to diehard status. I think that you are fully on board. Like nobody can call you a casual at any point. Like you are a true diehard. And a lot of people do that for college football as well. But if you're doing that for F1 as well, like my neighbor was, and he said even his daughters like stayed up and they're, like 8 and 11 years old, and they were staying up till like 1 a.m. to be able to watch this. And then the time change on top of it. So they really, it was a rough following day for them. But I think that you've moved into a different category. Is that every F1 race? That's a dumb question.
You know what's funny? You would actually be way better at watching F1 than I am because only a few races. I think Australia is the only one that's that late at night because it's just on the other side of the planet, man. So yeah, to your point, that race started at 11 and then there was a time change. So race ends at 2. I'm thinking, okay, maybe I can go to bed at 3. I look up, it's 4 a.m. I'm like, how am I awake at 4 a.m.? My whole sleep schedule's cooked. But most of the time, the races are on Sunday morning after college football. And so, like, for me, man, like, I am, like, so trying to sleep and, like, trying to, like, not be up at 6, 7 a.m. That's just not my vibe. And so I had to wake up so many times, just like John, be like, calling me, like, hey, dude, get up. It's 7 a.m. on Sunday after college football. Because I'm just not a morning guy. Like, I will wake up, get ready, prep for the podcast, and go do it. It was my routine. And so that's the thing, is being up early on Sunday mornings.
Darn near impossible. Don't like to do it. Have to do it. We did sleep past 8 because of the time change. Only because of that. I said to Lauren, going into that night, we weren't watching F1 going into Sunday night or going into Sunday morning. But I did say, hey, do you think Claire is going to sleep as late as she ever has because we have the time change working in our favor? And she's like, I don't, what? No, why would you bring that? No, why would you try and jinx us by saying that? And she did sleep till 8:10, but yeah, let's just say if I had watched F1 and tried to pull that off, it would have been rough for your boy. Will, we need emails, theogkickoff@gmail.com. Please email us if there is an It Just Meant More game that you would like us to be able to do. If you have, and it might mean too much story, we would love to be able to hear from you. We, as of this moment, Will, are trying to figure out what our next It Just Meant More game is going to be, because there was one that we really wanted to do. It is not available in full on YouTube, and we have not had luck acquiring all the necessary footage to be able to do it. And it's part of a big reason why I think there is appeal to be able to do this is that if you want to watch these games, you can at the very least see a 20-minute highlight clip. And this game that we want to do, there is not even a 20-minute highlight clip, which that might be giving it away, but we will figure this out. We will figure this out at some point here. So
you know what? Now that I'm a little bit more awake, now that I always joke about my noon. I've had 2 people's names that just popped up in the back of my head that I'm going to ask if they have some kind of access to footage of this game. Not that I'm promising anything, but I have 2. If these people don't know, it's just not out there.
Okay. All right. We will have it. It Just Meant More on Friday. That is the plan. But again, TBD on the game as of right now. Please leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The OG Kickoff, where you can watch every episode of The OG Kickoff. Follow us on Twitter @CJ O'Gara, @GoSoHard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.